So my work over 25 years has been looking at this phenomenon of low-cost private schools. What I've been studying around the world is what I call grassroots privatization. It's not privatization through legislation, it's actually people voting with their feet and leaving the public schools and going to the private schools, and more private schools being created. In certain parts of Africa, for example, 70 to 80% of children are in these private schools. Parents are looking for the best thing for their children, and so they're evaluating all different options, and these are the best thing. Teachers and the proprietors, the entrepreneurs, are accountable to the parents, and therefore they find something that delivers what they want, educationally wise, for their children.
James Tooley, you've done a lot of research on low-cost private schools. Why do people in especially emerging market countries, but also in the United States, found such low-cost private schools? What is the reason for that?
Yeah. So my work over 25 years has been looking at this phenomenon of low-cost private schools, which are emerging en masse in emerging economies, as you say, in South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, for instance. In sub-Saharan Africa, I've been looking in Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Liberia, South Sudan, Kenya, and so on and so forth. And the reasons are, well, we say they're twofold. One is the negative reason. As the government schools, the public schools as typically called, are not good enough. And parents say our children are abandoned in the government schools, so therefore they choose an alternative. That's what we might say the negative reason. And then there is a positive reason, which is actually parents are looking for the best thing for their children, and so they're evaluating all different options, and these are the best thing. The teachers and the proprietors, the entrepreneurs, are accountable to the parents, and therefore they find something that delivers what they want, educationally wise, for their children, negative and positive.
Are there any empirical results on the empirical research results on the quality of private schools delivered compared to public schools?
Yeah.
I mean, the educational attainment, can that
yes.
be comparable?
So there's been a lot of research looking at comparative academic outcomes in the private, including the low-cost private schools and the public schools, the government schools, and it universally shows that the children, and it's not surprising it shows this, but children in the private schools, including the low-cost private schools, do better than equivalent children in the government schools. Strictly speaking, the research shows if you took a child with average characteristics and put them in a private school, they would perform better than such a child put into a public school. So there's been research from many countries. There's a very, very thorough research from Andhra Pradesh, in India, but research has been from all over.
What is the reason for that? Are the teachers better educated so that they can educate the people?
It's actually often is the opposite. The teachers are less educated in the low-cost private than the public schools. All that means is they don't have the requisite diploma or whatever that the children in the public schools, the teachers in the public schools have. But what they do have is commitment, they have energy, and again, those are the positive things, a love for the children, a love for the subject, those are the positive things. The negative things are teachers don't turn up in the public schools, or if they do turn up, they don't teach. They get the children to run errands for them, or do miscellaneous things. And so there is a negative reason that actually in the public schools, the teachers are not accountable to anyone. They're heavily unionized typically. They will not deliver what's required. In the private schools, if they don't turn up, they would be removed. So therefore they turn up and teach as required.
So more commitment. What about the size of the class? Does it matter?
Well, class size is an interesting area. There's been research on it and showing that it doesn't matter as much as people think. But typically, the private schools do have smaller class sizes. In the countries I've studied, typically they do have smaller class sizes than the public schools, and that's seen as very valuable by parents. Intuitively, it seems reasonable that if you're in a smaller class, then you're going to get more attention in a larger class. as I say, the research mostly from America is not quite that strong, but nonetheless, it is the case that private schools have this phenomenon and parents prefer it. And when we're talking class size, remember, in the private schools, it might be 25 or 30 children. In the public schools, it might be 80 to 100 children. There's quite sort of severe differences.
When it comes to education, liberal economists argue for privatization or for a voucher system, like Milton Friedman did.
Yes.
What is your point of view on that, on vouchers?
Yeah.
So should you privatize it at all?
Yes.
Without a voucher?
Yeah. So what I've been studying around the world is what I call grassroots privatization. It's not privatization through legislation. It's actually people voting with their feet and leaving the public schools and going to the private schools, and more private schools being created. In certain parts of Africa, for example, 70 to 80% of children are in these private schools. It's a mass phenomenon, but it's a privatization by stealth, if you like. But Milton Friedman, you're correct, he wrote in 1955 a paper called The Role of Government in Education, a very famous paper. And it's based on two principles. One was the protection of the child principle, and the second, externalities. Looked at externalities. And he says, for a democracy, you do need to have an educated population, and therefore it's right that the state should intervene to fund school places, but that they should be for anywhere, public, private, and so on, but for the reasons for democracy. And that was the argument taken up by, for example, Friedrich Hayek in The Constitution of Liberty. He took up the same argument. In fact, his argument was basically just Friedman's argument. He didn't add anything to it. Friedman later changed his mind, having read about the history of education in England and Wales, I think New York and Massachusetts, and also in provinces, states of Australia. He realized that actually people create educational opportunities, entrepreneurs create opportunities, parents prefer these, and the whole thing about low-cost private schools, the equivalent, emerged in, let's say, the 19th century England and Wales. You had almost universal coverage before the state got involved. And so Milton Friedman was very persuaded by that evidence. There's a footnote in one of his chapters of Capitalism and Freedom. And he changed his mind and said, actually, I don't hold that anymore. We can see how a fully private sector can emerge. In the interim, we will support vouchers as a means of getting to that the final private sector in education.
Okay, thank you very much for your evaluation.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, was it Capitalism and Freedom, the second book, whether he wrote with his wife?
Sure.
I got that wrong. It was Free to Choose, wasn't it?
Free to Choose, okay.
When he changed his mind. Capitalism and Freedom was where the original paper was published. It was Free to Choose. I don't know if you want to...
Okay.
It's Free to Choose is the one I was...
Okay.